Okay. Thanks for showing up tonight. Thanks for joining us online. We had a special request because everybody's allergies were acting up, and then people are getting colds. So, and we've had some stomach bugs going around too. So there's some bugs going around. People have been requesting the immune system, that we talk about the immune system, and always wondering, how does it, somebody comes in with allergies and they get adjusted and all of a sudden they don't have allergies anymore, or somebody comes in with a cold or a flu or whatever and they get adjusted and they recover like magically, and they always want to know, how does that work? So we give a presentation like this on the neuroimmunology, which is a study of how the nervous system actually affects and controls the immune system. So they've now started in that realm, started calling it the neuroimmune system, and there are certain cells that are specific to the neuroimmune system. So we'll probably get into some of that, but this is a more in-depth look at the immune system and how the nervous system impacts that. And of course, if you're talking about the nervous system, you're talking about chiropractic, because the spine protects the nervous system, right? So we want to look at this from the perspective of health, and we always talk about health in terms of function, okay? So when we talk about health in chiropractic, we mean what your body's normal function is. And we talk about things that can take us off of that line of 100% function. So if we're up here, our body's functioning at 100%, the build up in your system is equal to the breakdown, and our body is at ease. Well, there are things that can cause us to go away from that, and we talk about that causing dis-ease, or a state in our body where there's more breakdown than there is build up, okay? And if left unchecked, eventually we'll end up with a full-blown disease, and that's where we have those symptoms show up. So most people, when they think symptoms, they're thinking, okay, this person's sick. So when they're talking about the immune system and getting a cold or a flu bug, something like that, they always bring up the bug. Is it the bug itself, or is it something else? So the germ theory of disease started back with a German immunologist, bacteriologist, virologist, last name Koch. And Koch's postulates are like considered the foundation of the germ theory. And what Koch's postulates state is that you should be able to take someone or something, an animal, let's say, and you should be able to, if they're sick, find or identify the microorganism, whether it's a bacteria or a virus, and you should be able to then isolate that. Okay, so grow it on an agar plate, on a petri dish. And then you can take that pathogen and you can inject it into, the key word is a susceptible host, okay? But the way that we've been taught the germ theory, it makes it seem like if you take the bug from a sick person and you expose a healthy person, they get sick, okay? And that's kind of like the media kind of feeds into that too. They'd like us to believe that you can take somebody who's perfectly healthy, 100% function, has a functioning immune system, and you expose them to this bug, and immediately and automatically they get sick 100% of the time. And it's not 100%. Okay, we're going to go over that. But the key word here is susceptible. Koch's postulates, the germ theory, does not say that you can take a microorganism, virus or bacteria, from a diseased person and expose a healthy person and get them sick. It says you can expose a susceptible person and get them sick. So we'll talk a little bit about what does susceptible mean. But Louis Pasteur was a French virologist or immunologist, probably most famous for like the smallpox vaccine. And what he said is it's the seed, not the soil, right? So it's the bug, not the person's internal environment, that equals disease, or that person getting diseased. So again, in his mind, you could take a sick or a dead rat, isolate whatever caused that sickness or death and then inject it into a healthy rat and make them sick or dead, okay? But we talk about this a lot where we look at symptoms of disease a little bit differently than most in the medical community. When we see things like a runny nose or sneezing, coughing, those type of things, fever, we see it as your body has a normal function and a normal reaction to being exposed to that bug, okay? So these are all actual functions of our body that come about by the immune system, whether it's the first, second, or third lines of defense, okay? So a runny nose is actually the first line of defense. That's one of the first. So the runny nose, the sneezy, the coffee, those type of things have to do with the barrier. The first line of defense in the immune system is things like our skin and things like mucous membranes, where a bug is going to have to come through one of those airways and come in contact with one of those mucous membranes. And when it does, it meets up with a receptor, which then triggers a response in the body. And that response, in most cases, first response is increased mucus secretion, okay? So when you're exposed to something that isn't supposed to be there, whether it's a bug, a bacteria or virus, or whether it's something pollen or dust or whatever it is that's in the air right now that everybody's reacting to, your first line of defense is that barrier, and your first reaction then, if your immune system and your nervous system are communicating properly, should be, hey, this isn't supposed to be there. Let's defend this body. And the first thing that your body will do then is increase that mucus secretion, because it's going to actually catch more stuff in that mucus secretion. And then what happens? Well, it drains down past the tonsils, adenoids, and different immune, glands, and they'll collect it, but they'll also catalog it, okay? And in cataloging it, there are specific cells within those glands that will break down that, bug or pollen and look at specific proteins within that bug or pollen. And then they're going to make antibodies to that, okay? So that the next time we're exposed to it, we can identify it and have antibodies on hand to kill it, okay? So all of these things, again, would, in my mind, be just a normal function of a healthy individual who has a good functioning immune system. That fever isn't actually the first line of defense, right? Those mucous membranes and the barriers like our skin are the first line of defense, but a fever is actually a defense mechanism. And in most cases, that fever, remember, will, if we do nothing with it, it'll usually burn off whatever it is, that bug, virus, or bacteria, 99% within 48 hours, okay? So that 1% of the time, we probably have something going on that might need some intervention, but 99% of the time, if you get exposed to a bug and it gets past those mucous membranes and now it's deeper, your body's going to spike a fever, and what will happen is we bring that fever up to a nice high level that bug can't survive or it can't reproduce. Most bugs, whether it's a bacteria or a virus, they're very temperature specific. So if you raise that temp up a degree or two, and we're talking like 101, 102, something like that, it's going to kill that bug, and then what happens is that fever comes back down. But again, what we've been taught is, give your kid a Tylenol, because Tylenol has been shown to reduce fevers, and it does. But that's not the question. This fever study was done at Harvard back in like the 90s, and they had 200 volunteers over that 2-year period of time that they were doing this fever study. They weren't studying, does Tylenol reduce a fever, because we already knew that. But what they were looking at was, does giving that kid or that person a Tylenol reduce the length of that fever or that sickness? And what they found was the placebo group actually got better 3 to 4 days sooner than the Tylenol group. And if you think about that logically, if that fever does have a purpose, and we believe it does, spiking that fever burns off that bug. So if we spike that fever, but then we kill it right away with a Tylenol and we bring it back down to a nice comfy level, what we've just done is we've made it now easy for that bug to reproduce and to survive, okay? And so that bug actually makes more bugs, and then over the next, 4 hours, as the body fights to get that fever back up, we give them another Tylenol and we bring it back down to that nice comfy level. And that goes on for 3 to 4 days, where 3 to 4 days is actually the amount of time that it takes the body to then generate a cell-mediated response, which is get a message to an immune cell, get it to make some antibodies, and then get it to bring those antibodies to the site of the infection, if you will, and then kill it, and then clean up the mess, okay? So it takes 3 to 4 days to do that. The first line of defense, or the mucous membranes, that happens almost instantaneously. That fever, that's usually within 24 hours of that bug getting deeper than the mucous membranes. And then in most cases, 99% of the time, that fever will kill that bug within 48 hours, okay? So they also did a study, and when we talk about susceptible, okay, remember the key word in the germ theory is that it has to be injected into a susceptible host. So who's susceptible, or what percent of the population at any given moment is susceptible? Harvard also did a study where they took the rhinovirus, which is the common cold virus, and they isolated it and they implanted it directly in the mucous membrane of the nose and throat of X number of volunteers. I think it was over 200 for this study, but anywho, there was quite a few in this study. And what they found was only 12% of those people that had it directly implanted in their mucous membranes actually ever got sick or developed a symptomatic case, okay? So 12%. And that kind of brings us back to the Farr's law, which is where we get the bell curve from. Now, you guys remember back during COVID when the Diamond Princess was that cruise ship where it got loose on this cruise ship and they're out to sea and everybody's stuck on this cruise ship with the crappy ventilation and everybody's breathing the same bugs. 12% of the people on that ship actually got sick, got COVID, got a symptomatic case, and then of that 12%, those people followed the bell curve in terms of the symptoms, okay? So we're going to talk about that bell curve a little bit. That's Farr's law. That's been around since like just before the Civil War. They knew that this is the progression of most, pandemics that we've come in contact with, most viruses. And it's really a look at how the immune system responds and how people are or aren't, the majority of us aren't susceptible at any given time. So when we say the immune system, what we're talking about is that system, complex network of cells and proteins that defend the body against infection. And it keeps that record. Okay, that's what having a memory, some of those cells actually, like a memory T cell, they actually record and keep a record of everything that we've been exposed to, whether it's a microbe or in some cases a pollen, right? So with that memory, then again, we can call on that if exposed at a later date, then to get those antibodies quickly to the site to defeat that bug. So just different stages or phases of the immune system. So we talked about the mucous membranes here, okay, and that's part of what we would call the innate immune system. So the barrier, it's something innate, okay? And again, there are certain cells responsible for the increase in the secretion of mucus in those mucous membranes. And those cells, where'd they go? When you take an antihistamine, that's blocking these cell types that actually the histocytes that release histamine, okay? And histamine, one of the functions is in those mucous membranes, it releases that mucus or increases that mucus secretion, okay? So those cells are usually in or associated with the mucous membranes. They do float around in the bloodstream too. And a lot of times when you see like a rash or something like that, it's a histamine response. When you got something that itches, it's a histamine response. So that's a specialized cell that has, you know, histamine released when it's triggered. And again, there are specific cells that bring that trigger to the cells of the immune system, okay? So the innate immune system, those are all things that are you know, either early borders or early inflammatory mediated cells. The acquired immune system, that's later, meaning, okay, we acquired it, meaning we had to have cells there to kill this bug, break it down, and then take those parts and feed it to another cell to make antibodies to it, and then we've acquired that immunity, okay? So the borders, of course, are immediately, they're always there, but like I said, the early inflammatory, the fever, that's all cell mediated. Those things are within 24 to, let's say, you know, 36, 48 hours, somewhere in that range. Whereas in the mid-range here, we're looking at those cells, the natural killer cells, for example, that have to show up, kill that bug, break it down, a macrophage, which is a cell that breaks it down and then feeds it over to one of those CD4 or B cells, CD8, one of those memory cells that produces that antibody and then remembers that protein, okay? So all those cells, they take like roughly a week to act. Whereas that when we talked about the cell-mediated response, we're talking about those macrophages or those natural killer cells that have to be activated. Takes them 3 to 4 days, like we said, and then they go to that site and they'll kill that infection. They'll literally eat the bugs. But then after eating the bugs, then they meet up with some of these other cells and they pass off that information and those parts of those proteins, and then those cells make, come on in, those cells make the antibodies then, okay? So it's a whole process, anywhere from like 24 hours up to 9 days. And 9 days is an interesting length of time. But for whatever reason, our body kind of works in cycles of like 3s, 6, and 9s, okay? And 9 days, usually if you have an injury, like you fell on your wrist and you think, I might have broke my wrist, you go in, you get it x-rayed, they'll x-ray it right away, but then they'll tell you it's going to take, we can't see anything yet, but it's going to take your body 9 days to reabsorb those broken down, beaten up cells and clean up that mess and be able to see that clear line of a fracture. So it's 9 days, okay? That's roughly for whatever reason, when our body has to break something down and then build something back up or put a patch on it, it takes roughly 9 days, okay? So just stick that 9 days in your head. It's an interesting thing, and you'll start to kind of see that pattern, okay? So components of the nervous system, we just talked about it. We talked about that innate, and that's that innate system. It's mostly mucus producing and histamine producing cells, and then the adaptive immune response. Those are the cells that make those antibodies, okay? So when we think about the immune system, we usually don't think of those mucous membranes, but that's a big part of it, okay? So the skin, the mucous membranes, like our skin is only on the outside of the body, but on the inside of every orifice that you have on your cheeks, your throat, your, you know, the alveoli and everything when you breathe, that's all covered in mucus membranes. Ears, eyes, nose, throat, tonsils, that's again, a gland that when you get that mucus secretion, it's going to run down the back of the throat, and part of the process is it goes by the tonsils, they collect it, and then the cells within that, there are immune cells within that will catalog it, okay? So that the next time you're exposed to it, your body can respond more quickly. So the lymph vessels in the neck and throat, lymph nodes, again, you have them in the neck and the throat because mucus runs by that, like when you're sleeping and you've been snotty for a couple days or whatever, it's running by those lymph nodes. But we have lymph nodes elsewhere in the body too, okay, like in the armpits, in the groin. They're basically at stations along the flow of lymph. And we don't really talk about the lymphatic system probably enough, but it's huge in terms of the immune response, and it's huge in terms of healing and detoxification and breaking down and building up. Like in your body, when you have, you know, a cell group of cells that die off and get replaced every 90 days, that means roughly every season, right, every 3 months, you're going to have a massive dump of garbage in your system. And if you think about this from like a creative perspective, what's the purpose of a bacteria? It's to break something down that's dead or dying to a smaller, you know, component. And then a virus will take that smaller component and break it down even smaller, okay? And you got all this garbage in your system, and those bacteria, they live off of it. So you're probably more susceptible because having that garbage floating around in your system, it does change the pH, okay? It takes your body some time. The lymph system, the lymphatic system, okay, has to get all that stuff pumped out of the system, and it goes through the liver, and it goes from there through the kidneys and through the bowel, and it eventually gets excreted out, okay? But the lymph system carries all that stuff, all right? And it's not like the circulatory system where that heart is constantly pumping and pounding and pushing that blood through the system. The lymphatic system requires motion, and it depends largely on the normal motion of the body to pump that fluid out. So that's why after an adjustment, I'll say, okay, now go for a walk, right? If somebody has a disc that's damaged, that damaged tissue there, those cells are going to get broken down. They're going to get recycled. New cells are going to come in to take their place. But where does the garbage go? It gets pumped over the lymph system, okay? So motion, moving, primarily the muscles, are what pumps that garbage through the lymph system, and then eventually we excrete it out one end or the other, okay? So that motion is really important. That being up and moving is really important for our immune system. It's important for normal pH in our body too. Like I said, if you got all that garbage in your system, like every 3 to 4 months, because there's a big turnover in your body, then it makes sense in my brain that, you know, if you're going to do a cleanse, something like that, it would make sense to kind of time it around the seasons, the turn of the seasons, because that's kind of what our body does. It has those big turnovers of cells at the turn of the seasons usually, which I think is why my grandma, my great-grandma, everybody from the old country has their spring, summer, fall, and winter elixirs. And grandma would always give us our, you know, spring or fall elixir, and it had basically whatever would make you poop, right? and it had molasses, and it had some horseradish, and it was terrible stuff, but it was supposed to cleanse your blood and help you get all that garbage out of your system so that it wasn't just sitting around in there. waiting for bacteria to come in and grow and reproduce to have to break that stuff down. Once that stuff is broken down, then the bacteria kind of go back to normal, okay? But they do have a purpose in your body as well, okay? So that's all the different parts of the immune system there. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about the lymph system in future presentations. But the right raw materials, Joel Fuhrman said that the right raw materials, giving your body what it needs, can double or triple the response of the immune system. So with that in mind, the wrong raw materials can probably do the reverse of that. It can cause you to take 2 to 3 times longer to get over a cold or a bug or a flu or something like that. So it's always ironic when somebody comes in and says, yeah, I've had this cough now for like 3 weeks, or I've had this bug for like 3 weeks. What's going on? Are you getting enough sleep? No. Are you drinking enough water? No. Did you eat your vegetables? You know, every question that you ask them, no. Nope. I haven't seen you in here to get a job. Yeah, nope. I just came in because I was dying. You know, if you give your body all the resources that it needs, you don't have to give it a bunch of excess. You just basically give it what it needs. If you're just getting by with the bare essentials, your body's going to be probably 2 to 3 times more effective than if you're deficient and not drinking enough water. Again, that lymph system is fluid, okay? And the more fluid it is, the easier it is for it to push that stuff out of the body. So being well hydrated is probably a lot more important than we realize. And it also plays a big part, like I said, in the pH. So if you've got all these bacteria breaking down garbage in your body every 3 to 4 months, but the pH in your system is very acidic, and it kind of makes it easier for those bacteria to stick around and grow and reproduce, the likelihood of getting an infection, as opposed to them just doing their job, breaking stuff down and then being excreted, it goes way up, okay? So the susceptibility, again, back when Louis Pasteur was having this debate, he was debating Claude Bernard, who was a Frenchman as well, who was looking at the same numbers that Louis Pasteur was looking at during the smallpox epidemic. And he was saying, no, it's not the seed, it's the soil. He said, these people are susceptible. And that is where we started to see the bell curve. People paying attention to, like, everybody in this village was exposed to this bug, but only 12% of them got sick, okay? Why only 12%? Why did these people in the same household have one guy get sick and one guy not? Okay, now of the people that got sick, we can put them on the bell curve, and this is called Farr's law. So the bell curve basically states that you're going to have the majority of the population in the center here, the 34, 34, 13, 13, so roughly 80% in that region right there. And then on either side, you're going to have that 2% over here. It would be the 2% that get sick enough that they require hospitalization, okay? And then of that, it's usually that 0.1%, just like we ended up seeing with COVID. It was about 2% that ended up, you know, having severe symptoms and either needing a medication or hospitalization. And of that, the 0.1, those were the people that were extremely compromised, that ended up dying from it. Over here, we got that 2% that, like, they don't have any symptoms. They don't, you know, they're like superhuman. And then that 0.1% on that side, that's like the people that actually got better from it. You know, it somehow improved them. They were able to take it and incorporate it into their DNA, and somehow it made improvements in their system. So again, it is never the case where 100% of the people that get exposed to a bug, regardless of that bug, end up getting sick from it. That's never the case. There's no such thing as a bug that has 100% transmissibility, okay? That's usually around 12% for most airborne stuff, okay? So the respiratory type viruses, those are usually around 12%. And then Farr's law, every respiratory virus or pathogen that we've ever experienced follows Farr's law. So the guys knew that pathologist from Germany, he was standing on the rooftop screaming at the beginning of COVID, basically this. He's like, no, you guys are nuts. There's no way that there's a 4% kill rate. There's no way that, this respiratory virus is going to be this deadly. He's like, it'll have an initial wave. It'll wipe out the people in the nursing homes that are susceptible. And then it's going to follow Farr's law. Okay. And nobody knew what Farr's law was. So we had to go back to our textbooks and be like, oh yeah, the bell curve. That's where that came from. So this presentation is a bit long. So rather than go into the second half here, what time are we at right now? Okay. So about 6:30. So we'll cut it here. And then we'll pick up next week, and it's going to go into more the deficiencies like we talked about, a little bit more on lymph, but also the nervous system and the different cells that are in our body that the nervous system uses to control the immune system, and those cells that are now classified as neuroimmune cells, what they are and what they do. And again, we know, because you're in a chiropractic talk, that the end result is going to be, if you get your nervous system clear of interference, these cells are going to work better, and here's the effect that's going to have on the immune system, okay? So for that, tune in next week. We'll cut it short tonight. Thanks for showing up tonight, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. As per usual, anybody who tunes in online, we'll do the full exam, x-rays, and 2 free adjustments for anybody just for tuning in online or showing up here. So thanks again. You guys have a great evening.